Hello to all Cinemaster lovers. Hope you enjoy watching. Let's get started. The movie starts with Calvin in prison, working out in his cell. His fellow inmates are afraid of him, and he has a great influence among them. It's the day of his release, and he walks through the prison towards his freedom. The prisoners watch him with envy because he's leaving. The exit gates open, and a huge shadow emerges, which belongs to Calvin. However, it turns out Calvin is a small-sized man, despite his big reputation. His friend Percy arrives to pick him up in his car. When Percy opens the car door for Calvin, he accidentally hits him with it. On the road, Percy tells Calvin there's a job worth $100,000. Calvin asks what the job is, and Percy explains they will steal a jewel, after which they will settle down and get married. There are two engaged people named Vanessa and Daryl. Daryl is financially struggling and has proposed to her with a ring without a jewel. He tells Vanessa she got a promotion at work, and the new job can't wait long after their marriage. Meanwhile, Percy and Calvin arrive at the jewelry store. Percy pulls out his gun in the street to prepare for robbing the store, but Calvin slaps him to calm his excitement. They plan how to steal the jewels. Percy enters the store with a large bag containing Calvin. Calvin moves inside the bag and reaches the display glass with the jewels. Percy creates a diversion by talking to the store employee, so she doesn't notice Calvin. Calvin goes under the display glass, saws it from beneath, and successfully steals the jewel. But a dog enters the bag with Calvin, surprising him. Percy carries the bag and leaves the store. The dog's owner searches for her missing dog. Suddenly, the dog barks inside the bag, catching the owner's attention. She calls security, thinking Percy stole her dog. The employee notices the jewel is missing and calls the police. Percy leaves the store with the bag, unnoticed, and gets into the car. He throws the dog out of the window and its owner catches it. Percy tries to drive away but finds the car is clamped due to a parking violation. The police arrive due to the employee's report. Percy panics and runs, forgetting his friend. Later, he remembers and goes back to carry Calvin, who can't run fast because of his small legs. The police ask the dog's owner about the thieves' appearance, suspecting them because of their skin color. Calvin and Percy run into a supermarket with the police chasing them. Coincidentally, Daryl and Vanessa are there, arguing about postponing their pregnancy. Calvin hides the jewel in Vanessa's bag to avoid the police finding it with him. The police arrest an innocent black man but release him when they realize he's not the thief. Vanessa and her fiancé leave, and Calvin and Percy follow them for the jewel. They spy on them at home, overhear their conversation about the child, and see Vanessa's bag with the jewel. Percy suggests Calvin disguise himself as a baby and sneak in unnoticed. Calvin disagrees, but Percy insists. They dress Calvin as a baby, leave him at Vanessa's door, ring the bell, and hide. A passing dog stops at Calvin and urinates on him. Daryl and his fiancée open the door, find the baby, and Calvin acts like a child. They find a note with the baby, written by Percy with many spelling mistakes, saying to take care of baby Calvin because his parents can't keep him. They bring Calvin inside, but Vanessa is disgusted by the dog's urine smell on him. They change his diaper, but Calvin winks at Vanessa, making her uneasy. She calls the child care center, but it's closed for the weekend. Vanessa's father suggests returning the baby to where they found him. Vanessa wants to call the police, but Calvin cries like a baby upon hearing police, fearing for himself. Vanessa worries about his health and takes him to the doctor. At the clinic, the doctor finds a knife wound and a tattoo on the baby's arm, suspecting Calvin's family harmed him. After the checkup, the doctor says the baby is fine, and they dress him. Vanessa insists on returning him to his family, but her fiancé believes they are abusive and decide to keep him until the child care center opens on Monday. While they talk, Calvin takes the bag and runs in the hospital, but a police officer notices the running baby, picks him up, and looks for his parents. Daryl and his fiancée chase after him, explaining to the officer. Calvin calls Vanessa Mom, touching her heart, and she takes him back. Meanwhile, a dangerous gang leader named Mr. W, who hired Percy for the jewel theft, threatens Percy to return the jewel or face death. Percy is scared and promises to handle it. At home, Vanessa calls friends to see the baby. When they see him, they are puzzled by his appearance and behavior, unsure what to say. One of them tries to play with the baby and shakes his hand. Calvin greets him forcefully and makes him scream in pain because he is angry. Another person pinches the child's nose gently, which angers Calvin, and he breaks his nose. Vanessa then takes the baby to meet her friends. Calvin likes one of them and signals for her to carry him. She picks him up and places him on her lap, and Calvin starts harassing her without her realizing it. Later, Vanessa bathes the baby and tries to get into the bathtub with him, but Daryl appears and ends up bathing with Calvin. Calvin is shocked to find a man with him in the same bathtub crying. At night, when the house is asleep, Calvin wakes up, searches for the bag, finds it, and discovers the jewel inside. He rushes to Percy to give it to him, but Vanessa's father suddenly appears with a gun, thinking Calvin is a thief. Daryl intervenes and saves Calvin, explaining to the father that he's just a baby he's holding. Daryl takes Calvin to the kitchen to prepare a bottle for him and talks about how he wants to be a good father and would never abandon Calvin like his own child. Calvin is moved by Daryl's words, forgets his mission, and begins to bond with the role he's playing. The next morning, Vanessa wakes up Daryl, telling him that the previous night was unforgettable. Daryl is confused because he believes he didn't approach her all night and has no idea what happened. Calvin appears, revealing that he was the one who got into bed with her and had a relationship with her. Vanessa prepares breakfast and makes baby food for Calvin. Calvin refuses to eat it and steals Vanessa's father's food. Vanessa is amazed at how quickly her father ate his food, but he tells her the baby ate it. She laughs and doesn't believe him. Vanessa leaves for work, leaving Daryl to take care of the baby. Daryl takes Calvin to the park, where they play. However, Calvin's way of playing is rough, causing harm to Daryl. Daryl is with his friends at the park and buys ice cream for Calvin and the other children. Percy seizes the opportunity to spy on them and asks Calvin where the jewel is. Calvin tells him it's in the bag, but when they check, they find 3 identical bags and can't tell which one it is. One of Daryl's friends sees Percy and thinks he's trying to kidnap Calvin. Percy sees them coming after him and runs away, grabbing a random bag. Daryl checks on Calvin, relieved that nothing happened to him. Calvin feels guilty about everything. Percy delivers the bag to Mr. W, claiming the jewel is inside. Mr. W empties the bag but finds only dirty diapers and children's toys. Angry, he orders his men to tie Percy up and gives him one last chance to retrieve the jewel, threatening to kill him if he fails. Percy flees in fear, continuing his mission. Mr. W orders his men to follow Percy and kill him after he retrieves the jewel. Meanwhile, Daryl takes Calvin to watch a hockey game. Calvin uses the opportunity to retrieve the jewel from the bag and puts it in his mouth. Daryl notices something in Calvin's mouth and asks him to open it. Calvin is forced to swallow the jewel and shows an empty mouth. Frustrated, Calvin throws a drink at one of the hockey players. The player gets angry and asks who did it, and the crowd points to Daryl. The player attacks Daryl, but Calvin defends him, showing his affection for Daryl. The player retaliates by hitting Calvin hard, causing him to lose consciousness. Daryl takes Calvin home, where his face is bruised, and he lies in bed. Daryl blames himself for what happened, feeling unprepared to be a father. The next day, Daryl and his fiancée throw a birthday party for Calvin. During the party, Vanessa's father watches the news and sees Calvin accused of a major theft. Calvin feels emotional, realizing he finally has a family that loves and cares for him. Vanessa's father gives Calvin a teddy bear as a gift, hiding something inside. Percy rings the doorbell, claiming to be Calvin's father and wanting to take him. Daryl gets angry and refuses to hand Calvin over, calling Percy a bad person and hitting him with a trash can lid. Mr. W's men watch, thinking Daryl is Percy's partner in the theft. Calvin's stomach hurts from swallowing the jewel, so he drinks oil to relieve himself. He ends up with diarrhea and soils his diaper. Vanessa changes his diaper and finds the jewel, thinking Daryl got it to replace the missing gem in her ring. They go on a romantic date to celebrate the jewel, leaving Calvin with Vanessa's father. After they leave, Vanessa's father confronts Calvin, knowing who he really is. He throws Calvin into the air, causing him to fall. He contacts Percy to take Calvin away quickly. When Daryl and Vanessa return home, they find her father fighting with Calvin. They think he's gone mad and send him to a mental health facility. Vanessa puts Calvin to bed, and Daryl finds the teddy bear with a hidden camera. He connects it to the TV and discovers Calvin's act. He rushes to tell Vanessa, but finds Calvin has escaped with the jewel. Vanessa is shocked and goes to retrieve her father from the mental facility. Daryl calls the police to report what happened. Percy and Calvin are in a car, celebrating their successful operation. Percy says Mr. W thinks Daryl is the thief, so they don't need to return the jewel. Calvin fears for Daryl and kicks Percy out of the car, returning to Daryl's house. At the same time, Mr. W and his men arrive at Daryl's house, demanding the jewel. When Daryl says he doesn't have it, they attack him. Calvin appears, pretending to be a child. Mr. W asks whose baby he is, and Daryl claims him as his son. Mr. W and his men take the child to the bed in his room so he won't see what happens to his father. In the room, Calvin hits the man on the head, causing him to lose consciousness, and uses children's toys to hit another man. Then he goes down and finds Mr. W playing with the airplane. Mr. W pulls out his gun and points it at the child, telling him to leave the airplane. The child hears him and throws it, and it flies, turns, and hits him, causing him to fall to the ground. Calvin grabs the gun and tells Mr. W not to move. The police arrive and arrest Mr. W. After that, Calvin runs, but one of the police officers catches him, thinking that the child is Daryl's son, and takes him to his father. Daryl has Calvin hand the jewel to the police, The police reward Daryl with $100,000 for helping them catch the thief. Then Daryl speaks honestly with Calvin, saying he was happy to have a son for a while. Calvin cries and says he was happy to have a father. Calvin puts on his clothes and leaves, crying, not wanting to go. Daryl feels sorry and says they will remain friends. 9 months later, Vanessa gives birth to a child. His grandfather plays with him. Calvin appears while he was playing with the child. It turns out that the boy looks like Calvin. This is because of the relationship Calvin had with Vanessa. If you liked today's video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to receive all new updates. See you in the next video. Goodbye.